People like this soy boy love to go on and on about being on the right side of history. Turns out they're not even on the right side of the 20th century because last week, Ukraine's president and professional Churchill cosplayer Zelensky brought a Nazi to the Canadian Parliament and they gave him a standing ovation.
Zelensky's speech received at least a dozen standing ovations. There was also one for this man, a 98-year-old Ukrainian Canadian who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians during the Second World War.
So on Friday, Zelensky showed up in Canada in his ridiculous all-green costume to have his ass kissed by yet another government. During his speech, the entire parliament smiled and cheered for this man, 98-year-old Yaroslav Hunka, who Canadian media described as having fought in the 1st Ukrainian Division in the Second World War before immigrating to Canada. Anthony Rota, who's Speaker of the House of Commons in Canada, then went on to describe Hunka as a, quote, veteran from the Second World War who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98. Obviously, they all skipped the history lesson that covered the Nazi invasion of Ukraine, then Soviet Ukraine, that the Germans were widely welcomed by much of the Ukrainian population as liberators, and that Russia was on our side for most of World War II. A veteran from the Second World War who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians is a really nice way of saying Nazi. And it gets worse.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98. His name is Yaroslav Hunka. And I was going to say he's in the gallery, but I think you beat me to that. But I'm very proud to say that he is from North Bay and from my riding of Nipissing-Temiskaming. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. Thank you.
The Canadian media might be saying that Hunka fought for the 1st Ukrainian Division, but this is the name people use to whitewash Ukraine's links with Nazis both then and now. The division was actually the 14th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS. The SS unit was made up of recruits from Western Ukraine and was armed by, trained by, and commanded by Nazi Germans. In 1944, the division was even visited by the head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, who celebrated the soldiers' willingness to slaughter Poles. 3 months earlier, the unit had carried out the Huta Peniska massacre, where 500 to 1,000 Polish villagers in what is now Ukraine were burned alive. And not only did Zelensky bring a Nazi to the Canadian Parliament, and not only did the Canadian Parliament applaud this Nazi with a standing ovation, they were cheering someone who volunteered to join the SS. Because the SS doesn't conscript people, you have to want to join. You had to choose to join the most ruthless, heartless, evil people on the planet. The people behind the vast majority of the unimaginable crimes people like Trudeau love to throw in the faces of their enemies today. And the refusal to acknowledge Ukraine's links with Nazis both then and today has landed us here. In World War II, over 45,000 Canadians died fighting the Nazis. Now Trudeau is inviting Nazis into their parliament, and there are monuments to this Ukrainian SS division in Canada and in the United States, by the way. The West has become so happy to swallow the binary nonsense that Ukraine is all good that we are allowing the history of World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, to be rewritten to cover up the crimes of Ukrainians who must remain the good guys at all costs. If you want to be on the right side of history, then not cheering Nazis seems like a good place to start. Unless you're an idiot and you believe that comedians are somehow the luckiest people on the planet and their life is just a revolving door of potential punchlines, We all assume that their "this really happened" stories are just that, stories.
How does he do it? How does he pretend to do it? How does he remain contrived? I'm not honest for a second up here. Honesty's for the birds, baby. You want an honest comedian? Go see the rest of them, all right? This thing actually happened. Cool.
We didn't care if something was true or not. All we used to care about is whether it was funny. But now people don't care if something is funny as much as they care about it being true. Comedians are commentators now because politics has been infused into absolutely everything, and the goal isn't laughter, it's clapter.
Abortion, I salute you! Women, if you need an abortion, get one! If you want an abortion, get one! If you're not pregnant but you think you eventually might be and want to order a future abortion, get one! If you're pregnant and you want to be pregnant, don't get one! It's up to you, and it doesn't have to be a big deal. It's actually a great deal. It's about $300. That's like 6 movie tickets. Movie tickets, a bad deal!
So clapter is when something isn't funny, but the audience will clap and cheer and laugh and say, "Oh, that's so true."
These are the clapter suggestions.
I'm sorry, clapter?
Clapter, that's when one of your jokes doesn't work, you don't get a laugh, you say something very obvious that everyone understands is correct. That way, at least you get applause.
People clap and cheer because they either agree, or more importantly, they want to prove to everyone else how much they agree.
The vaccine.
So a comedian will stand up and say something like racism is bad, and people will lose their minds. But now that a lot of comedians are just leading as hard as they can on this stuff, they're taking advantage of two kinds of comedy, the old way and the new way. We used to judge comedy as just entertainment, and we didn't care if they were telling the truth or not. But now comedy is being judged as commentary, used to push social change. People are assuming they're telling the truth to justify the change, and Hasan Minhaj is an obvious example, with his Netflix series The Patriot Act and stand-up specials, which are all built on supposedly autobiographical recounts of the struggles of being a Muslim American.
You need to respect Modi, India, and Hindus. I go, Carlos, you're Puerto Rican. He's like, I know, but I saw that shit on Instagram. It was funny. Yo, you got fan mail. I go, give me my fan mail, Carlos. He grabs a stack of letters. He hands them to me. I rip it open. I flip it over. And all this white powder falls into the stroller. And it falls on my daughter's shoulder. Her neck, her cheeks. And she's staring at me.
But an article in The New Yorker threatened to pull this new form of comedy to the ground recently. So the article is Hasan Minhaj's Emotional Truths. In his stand-up specials, the former Patriot Act host often recounts the harrowing experiences he's faced as an Asian American and Muslim American. Does it matter that much of it never happened to him? Here's one paragraph that upset a lot of people. In Minhaj's approach to comedy, he leans heavily on his own experience as an Asian American and Muslim American, telling harrowing stories of law enforcement entrapment and personal threats. For many of his fans, he has become an avatar for the power of representation in entertainment. But after many weeks of trying, I had been unable to confirm some of the stories that he had told on stage. When we met on a recent afternoon at a comedy club in the West Village, Minhaj acknowledged for the first time that many of the anecdotes he related in his Netflix specials were untrue. Still, he said that he stood by his work. Every story in my style is built around a seed of truth, he said. My comedy Arnold Palmer is 70% emotional truth, this happened, and then 30% hyperbole, exaggeration, fiction, emotional truth. And people did come out and defend Hasan Minhaj, like Whoopi Goldberg.
Hasan Minhaj, who is a stand-up, was recently sort of having to defend his comedy because a writer from the New Yorker called him out for making up stories. That's what we do. That's what we do. We tell stories and then we embellish them. And it's like, listen, if you're going to hold a comic to the point where you're going to check up on their stories, you have to understand a lot of it is not the exact thing that happened, because why would we tell exactly what happened? It ain't that interesting. There's information that we will give you as comics that will have grains of truth, but, you know, don't take it to the bank.
And that's, and that's what he said. He said specifically, every story in my style is built around a seed of truth.
Yes, you know, and that's our job. A seed of truth, sometimes the truth, and sometimes total BS.
But here's the real problem. I don't care if Hassan Minhaj is making stuff up if the goal is to make us laugh. But comedians like him are jumping back and forth between comedian and commentator, playing by two sets of rules at once. When they want to push social change and not be particularly funny, they're commentators. When they're caught lying, they're comedians. You can't be both. If we're going to be dumb enough to build and rebuild society based on what a comedian says about the state of our country, then what they're saying needs to be based on truth. Instead, how about this? Go to comedians for laughs and look elsewhere for moral guidance. Remember, just because it's funny doesn't mean it's true. So Canada manages to embarrass itself all the time. They say things like a boot, they force people like Ryan Reynolds on us, and they give standing ovations to actual Nazis.
Zelensky's speech received at least a dozen standing ovations. There was also one for this man, a 98-year-old Ukrainian Canadian who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians during the Second World War.
And Justin Trudeau did come out and apologize, but he also managed to make this all about Russian disinformation, because apparently it was Putin who forced him to stand and kiss a Nazi's ass.
Obviously, it's extremely upsetting that this happened. The speaker has acknowledged his mistake and has apologized. But this is something that is deeply embarrassing to the Parliament of Canada and, by extension, to all Canadians. I think particularly of Jewish MPs and all members of the Jewish community across the country who are commemorating Yom Kippur today. I think it's going to be really important that all of us push back against Russian propaganda, Russian disinformation, and continue our steadfast and unequivocal support for Ukraine, as we did last week with announcing further measures to stand with Ukraine in Russia's illegal war against it.
But there's something else we need to talk about here, not just making fun of Justin Trudeau. That's the media's role in all of this. Because how did Politico respond to the Canadian Parliament giving an SS soldier a standing ovation? Nazi-linked veteran received ovation during Zelensky's Canada visit. And the BBC went with this headline: Trudeau calls praise for Nazi-linked veteran deeply embarrassing. Nazi-linked. To recap, this is the same media who label people like us as Nazis all the time. If you don't think porn should be taught in schools, you're a book-burning Nazi. If you believe in any form of border control, you're a racist Nazi. And worst of all, if you voted for Trump or still support Trump, you're a dog-whistling, big bad orange man Nazi. But actual Nazis? They're suddenly just Nazi-linked. And yes, Yaroslav Hunka is a Nazi. I've seen a ton of really dumb people out there trying to defend him. But if you choose to join the SS, not only are you a Nazi, and not only are you a volunteer Nazi, you're the ultimate volunteer Nazi. You're the person doing the dirtiest of their dirty work, which usually meant slaughtering innocent civilians in the most barbaric ways possible. So this leaves one question: why are they suddenly saying Nazi-linked? Well, because they don't really care about Nazis. This is all about protecting the narrative. The narrative here is that Ukraine are the good guys and Russia are the bad guys. But it's not even enough to say that Ukraine are the good guys against the invading Russians, because the political and the media machine are just obsessed in keeping the military-industrial complex alive. So everything to do with Ukraine has to be celebrated as good, now, in the future, and in the past. And if that means accidentally cheering on actual Nazis, so be it. To protect this narrative, they will describe an actual member of the SS as a Nazi-linked veteran. At the same time, anyone here at home who doesn't subscribe to one think is just labeled a Nazi. If you're a conservative, you're a Nazi, but if you're an actual Nazi and you help push their narrative, you're just Nazi-linked. This should prove once and for all that they don't even know what a Nazi is, if they ever did, and they definitely don't care. To them, Nazi is just another catch-all phrase they use to describe people they don't like. Just like the overuse of words like homophobic, transphobic, racist, sexist, misogynist, or my favorite, problematic. And sometimes people are actually these things, sometimes people are actually Nazis, like actual Nazis. But only when it helps the media push their agenda. So even if you are an evil old man who volunteered to join the SS, don't worry. Just come out on the side of the issue the media cares about today, and even being a Nazi won't get in the way. They don't care about history, they don't care about the reality of what the Nazis did to millions of people in Europe. All they see the word Nazi as is a label to attack their enemies. And when an actual Nazi comes along that doesn't exactly help their narrative, they'll just rejigger the headline as much as they need. Because they care way more about their narrative than certainly the definition of Nazis, and definitely the victims of Nazis like this one in Europe. Have you ever seen a man more desperate to be a slave than Colin Kaepernick? Because that's apparently exactly what he wants. After Aaron Rodgers, may he rest in peace, snapped his Achilles in half 4 plays into the New York Jets season, proving once and for all that they will never ever ever succeed, Kaepernick wrote to the team asking for a job. Specifically, a spot on their practice squad, because, you know, he's super modest.
Former 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick wrote a letter to Jets general manager Joe Douglas that was dated September 21st, asking that the team consider signing him to the practice squad. According to rapper J. Cole, the letter was shared on Cole's Instagram account on Tuesday. In part, it read, "Worst case scenario, you see what I have to offer and you're not impressed. Best case scenario, you realize you have a real weapon at your disposal in the event you ever need to use it."
But there's just one problem. This is the same Colin Kaepernick who compared the NFL to slavery.
What they don't want you to understand is what's being established is a power dynamic. Before they put you on the field, teams poke, prod, and examine you, searching for any defect that might affect your performance. No boundary respected, no dignity left intact.
Come on, boy, hurry up. Look at that shape there. Look at this. Mr. Farmer, I got your bid. 30, James, 30 to you. 100. So, next one coming up, best one we got. 500. 600. Look at this here. Come on, who wants this? 700. There we go now. 1,000. 1,000. I'm telling you what I want. Yeah, I heard you. So.
Why is Colin Kaepernick so desperate to be a slave? Of course, the same people come out of the woodwork every single time Kaepernick isn't the starting quarterback of an NFL team to claim that this is actually just all about racism. Jameel Hill, who's never met a Hitler comparison she didn't like, showed off her sporting prowess with this tweet. The Jets instead chose to sign Trevor Siemian, who, checks notes, is 31 years old and hasn't won a game since 2017. Oh no! Except Colin Kaepernick is 35 years old and hasn't played a game since 2016. But people like Jameel Hill and all the other hacks defending Colin Kaepernick ignore one obvious point. Kaepernick doesn't care about football anywhere near as much as he cares about himself. Here's Stephen A. Smith in the world's least convincing hairline, parroting the same old stuff about Kaepernick being blackballed.
What's your reaction?
Sadness. Because it ain't gonna happen. See, we have to stop all of this noise and we have to address it with the realness that it deserves. Colin Kaepernick, I hope I'm wrong. I'd love to see him back in the National Football League. I believe he deserves an opportunity to be back in the National Football League. I believe that he was blackballed. I believe he was blackballed unfairly. I think it's a damn disgrace and a crime that he has been kept out of the National Football League this long. But where I've taken heat, and I will always take heat for this, because I will never, ever, ever change my position on this, is that in the end, not 2016 to 2019, but in the end, as of November 2019, when he had that tryout that the NFL organized, and he elected not to show up, and instead had that at a high school, an hour and 20 minutes away, Swagoo, Mad Dog Russo, Molly, I said on First Take the next morning, it is over.
He can complain that he's being blackballed all day long, even though I'd prefer it if we called it balls of colour. But why does he seem to think you have a right to play in the NFL? Don't forget, he only became overtly political when his career started to implode at the 49ers. doing things like kneeling during the anthem and wearing socks showing cops as pigs. After he cashed in on this nonsense with multi-million-dollar deals with Nike and insane documentaries comparing the NFL to slavery, you're surprised that teams don't want anything to do with him? In reality, though, this is really not that complicated. It has nothing to do with him kneeling or his ridiculous documentaries, or that he called his white adoptive parents racist. Because all that matters in sports is ability. If Kaepernick was as good as he thinks he is, or even half as good as he thinks he is, he'd be playing in the NFL. It's that simple. If you're good enough at football, you can beat the shit out of your wife and your starting spot will be waiting for you. Colin Kaepernick is two things. Utterly toxic, yes, but more importantly, he's not very good at football. And if you're going to compare potential employers to slave owners, you need to be, checks notes, really good at football.
The next question is for Governor DeSantis.
If we want to get things done, here's how we get it done in Washington. We must find a way.
Can we please respect the time?
What the was that? So last night was the second GOP debate, and it was a total mess. I watched it so you don't have to, so let's get straight to it. Here are my highlights and lowlights from the car crash that was the second debate. First lowlight has to be the way this debate was run. It was basically just this for 2 hours.
Loud noises!
First off, Fox Business decided there was a spot for one British moderator and they didn't pick me. Bullshit. They instead chose Stuart Varney, who immediately f***ed up the Univision woman's name.
I'm Stuart Varney of Fox Business, and I am thrilled to be sitting alongside my co-moderators, Fox News Channel Dana Perino and Ilya Calderon, Univision.
I mean, how hard is it to say Ilya Calderon? And most of the debate was a waste of time because the moderators allow candidates to shout over each other, didn't give them time to respond when they were called out, and asked ridiculous questions that destroyed any flow or continuity.
Do your homework, Tim, because Obama bought those curtains.
Did you send them back?
It's in the press.
Did you send them back?
It's the State Department.
Did you send them back?
Did you send them back? You're the one that works in Congress.
Oh my gosh.
You get it
You
done.
hung them on your curtains.
They were there before I even showed up at the residence. You are scrapping. You are scrapping.
I'm not scrapping.
You know I fought
Here's a fact. Here's a fact, though.
I cut taxes. I loaded up our
You wanted a gas tax increase, and then you wanted
Ladies and gentlemen, we do not intend to go ahead like this. In fact, we're about to take a commercial break.
And honestly, Univision's Calderon deserves her own lowlight. First off, because this is what we do to pander to Hispanic voters, apparently, all debates must now include a round of Spanish while everyone else just sits there smiling and pretending it's okay.
Please allow me to welcome our Spanish-speaking audience. Muy buenas noches a todos. Desde la Biblioteca Presidencial Ronald Reagan, los precandidatos republicanos también buscan su voto para las primarias del partido. Bienvenidos.
And good evening.
And then she launched straight into a round of questions that were right out of the Democratic Party propaganda book. There's this question to Ron DeSantis, which is quite literally a Kamala Harris talking point.
Florida's new Black History curriculum says, quote, slaves develop skills which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. You have said slaves develop skills in spite of slavery, not because of it. But many are still hurt. For descendants of slaves, this is personal. What is your message to them?
And in fairness to DeSantis, he refused to take the bait.
So first of all, that's a hoax that was perpetrated by Kamala Harris. We are not going to be doing that. Second of all, that was written by descendants of slaves. These are great Black history scholars, so we need to stop playing these games.
Then there's the honestly ridiculous claim that gun violence is a uniquely American problem from a Colombian citizen.
Governor Burgum, for the first time ever, a Univision poll found that mass shootings and gun safety are one of the most important issues for Latino voters. Mental health concerns are not unique to the United States, but gun violence is.
Next, she's going to be telling us that the United States has a coke problem. And then Calderon tried to force Mike Pence to accept her premise about LGBTQ people.
The Department of Homeland Security warns that violence against LGBTQ+ people is on the rise and intensifying. According to a recent study, members of that community are 9 times more likely to be victims of violent hate crimes. As president, how would you protect this community from violent attacks and discrimination?
Why was she asking Mike Pence? Well, because he's the Christian one, and Democrats all know that Christians are apparently massive homophobic bigots or something. I would love it if other groups that are statistically way more likely to be attacked were ever spoken about this way, like Jews maybe. But I'm not going to hold my breath. I don't think there's enough votes up for grabs. Now, I do think it's fine that other moderators are asked to host debates, but not when they hijack the event to push Democratic Party propaganda. You think MSNBC is falling over themselves to invite Mark Levin or Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson to moderate one of their debates? No, because the DNC isn't dumb. But the reason Ilya Kuldrin was included was because it's quite clear that the Republican Party is all in on identity politics, even though we're supposed to think it's dumb and pointless and racist, which it is. And that's the next lowlight of the evening.
There's no doubt that if you lead by example, it's the best way to get the job done. If you look at my office in the Senate, my chief of staff is the only Hispanic female chief of staff in the Senate. I hired her because she was the best, highest qualified person we have.
The United States is not a racist country. It's actually the least racist country in the world if you look past the propaganda. But obviously talking about race keeps racism alive. Why are we talking about people as white Americans, black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans? Why aren't we just talking about Americans? If Republicans keep talking as if issues that matter to everyone matter more to people because of their skin color, they're doing the left's work for them and keeping racism alive. Next lowlight, most debates end with a closing statement or something from each candidate, and instead Fox Business went with this train wreck of a Survivor ripoff.
It's now obvious that if you all stay in the race, former President Donald Trump wins the nomination. None of you have indicated that you're dropping out. So, which one of you on stage tonight should be voted off the island? Please use your marker to write your choice on the notepad in front of you. 15 seconds starting now. Of the people on the stage, who should be? I'm absolutely serious.
With all due respect, I mean, we're here, like, you know, we're happy to debate, but I think that that's disrespectful to my fellow competitors.
Nobody wants to participate.
Let's do some questions. Let's talk about the future of the country.
What was that? Again, good on DeSantis for leading the charge against the bullshit, but this kind of question is beneath Dana Perino, I'm sure she'd agree, beneath the candidates on stage, and most importantly, far beneath what Republican voters deserve from an event like this. And the last lowlight of the evening for me was the total cringe of it all. You had Chris Christie leaning into the camera with his pre-rehearsed attack on Donald Trump being Donald Duck because he likes to duck.
And Donald Trump should be here to answer for that, but he's not. And I want to look at that camera right now and tell you, Donald, I know you're watching. You can't help yourself. I know you're watching, okay? And you're not here tonight, not because of polls and not because of your indictments. You're not here tonight because you're afraid of being on the stage and defending your record. You're ducking these things. And let me tell you what's going to happen. You keep doing that, no one up here is going to call you Donald Trump anymore. We're going to call you Donald Duck.
I know a few other things Donald Trump likes to do that rhyme with duck that might give you a catchier nickname, let alone the question, if Trump is Donald Duck, what does that make Chris Christie? Then there's Mike Pence, who not only looked like shit, but decided that the debate was a perfect place to try out his comedy routine, and it went exactly as you'd expect.
Joe Biden doesn't belong on a picket line, he belongs on the unemployment line. I'm glad Vivek pulled out of his business deal in 2018 in China. That must have been about the time you decided to start voting in presidential elections. I served in Congress for 12 years, although it seemed longer. Chris, you mentioned the president's situation. My wife isn't a member of the teachers union, but I got to admit I've been sleeping with a teacher for 38 years. And so full disclosure.
Here's the thing, Mike Pence is a serious guy, and that's fine. His whole brand is a serious Christian whose faith is real, unlike most politicians. So I don't know why he tried to be something he's not, especially if it meant getting the entire country to picture him naked in bed. And on that note, time for the highlights. First highlight of the debate is Dana Perino. The other moderators were terrible, but Dana actually tried to control the chaos and held candidates' feet to the fire when they refused to answer questions, which they did a lot. Here's one great example. She asked Mike Pence about Obamacare, and he did what all the candidates did, which is try to talk about something else. She actually forced him to stay on topic, and it didn't go well for him.
You said if elected, you would repeal all Obamacare mandates. However, you also made that same promise in 2016. And at that time, Trump-Pence had congressional majorities for at least the first 2 years, and you did not deliver on that promise. So Obamacare, right now, it is more popular than ever. Why should Americans trust you, if you become president, to fix that, or is Obamacare here to stay?
Well, first, let me speak to the mass shootings issue, and then I'll answer that question. It's an important one, Dana. Look, I'm someone that believes that justice delayed is justice denied. And as a father of three, as the grandfather of three beautiful little girls, I'm I am sick and tired of these mass shootings happening in the United States of America. And if I'm president of the United States, I'm going to go to the Congress of the United States, and we're going to pass a federal expedited death penalty for anyone involved in a mass shooting so that they will meet their fate in months, not years. It is unconscionable that the Parkland shooter, Ron, is actually going to spend the rest of his life behind bars in Florida. That's not justice. We have to mete out justice and send a message to these would-be killers that you are not going to live out your days behind bars. You're going to meet justice in this system.
But does that mean Obamacare is here to stay?
Well, thank you for reiterating the question, because I'd love to answer it. Look, I think it's one of the choices here. You know, my former running mate, Donald Trump, actually has a plan to start to consolidate more power in Washington, D.C., consolidate more power in the executive branch. If I'm president of the United States, it's my intention to make the federal government smaller by returning to the states those resources and programs that are rightfully theirs under the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. That means all Obamacare funding, all housing funding, all HHS funding, all of it goes back to the states. We'll shut down the Federal Department of Education. Will allow states to innovate. We're going to revive federalism in America, and states are going to help bring America back.
But Stu, go ahead.
Next highlight is a quick one: the quality of the hair on stage. First off, Vivek Ramaswamy showed up like Jimmy Neutron, but we have to take a second to appreciate the hair and eyebrow game on Doug Burgum. I know I'm scraping the barrel with highlights. Give me a break. It was a terrible night. Next, we have Nikki versus Vivek round 2, who literally went Billy Madison on him.
There's one person on this.
This is infuriating because TikTok is one of the most dangerous social media apps that we could have. And what you've got, I honestly, every time I hear you, I feel a little bit dumber for what you say. Because I can't believe that here you've got a TikTok situation. What they're doing is these 150 million people are on TikTok. That means they can get your contacts, they can get your financial information, they can get your emails, they can get text messages, they can get all of these things.
This is very important for our party.
Exactly what they're doing.
This is very important for our party, and I'm going to say
you've gone and you've helped China make medicines in China, not America. You're now wanting kids to go and get on the social media that's dangerous for all of us. You went and you were in business with the Chinese that gave Hunter Biden $5 million. We can't trust you. We can't trust you. We can't have TikTok in our kids' lives.
This is very important.
Mr. Ramaswamy, you have 15 seconds.
I think, excuse me.
You have 15 seconds, Mr. Ramaswamy.
Thank you. I think we would be better served as a Republican Party if we're not sitting here hurling personal insults and actually have a legitimate debate about policy.
Not because I think this is particularly helpful, but because it's just so much fun to see how much she obviously hates him. It's also hilarious to see Vivek going from hurling personal insults last time to crying about personal insults the moment they're hurled at him. Another highlight, if you actually care about the whole point of the debate, which is to pick a nominee, is that the candidates actually mentioned Trump this time. We already know Chris Christie called him out with his cringe Donald Duck routine, but DeSantis called him out too.
I want to ask you about something that I think is on a lot of Republicans' minds. This election could come down to less than 50,000 votes in 3 states. Abortion was on the ballot in 6 states in 2022. Republicans lost all of them. Next year, abortion will likely be on the ballot in Arizona. That is a must-win state. Governor DeSantis, how are you going to win over independent, pro-choice voters in Arizona?
Same way we did in Florida. We won the greatest Republican victory in a governor's race in the history of the state, over 1.5 million votes. We were winning places like Miami-Dade County, Palm Beach, that nobody thought was possible because we were leading with purpose and conviction. I reject this idea that pro-lifers are to blame for midterm defeats. I think there's other reasons for that. The former president, he's missing in action tonight. He's had a lot to say about that. He should be here explaining his comments to try to say that pro-life protections are somehow a terrible thing. I want him to look into the eyes and tell people who've been fighting this fight for a long time. My wife and I earlier today were at the gravesite of President and Mrs. Reagan, and I noticed that there was a quote where it says, every single person has purpose and worth. We're better off when everybody counts. And I think we should stand for what we believe in. I think we should hold the Democrats accountable for their extremism, supporting abortion all the way up until the moment of birth. That is infanticide, and that is wrong.
And so did Vivek Ramaswamy, in a way. And by in a way, I mean by doing so from inside Trump's ass.
I will respect Donald Trump and his legacy because it's the right thing to do. But we will unite this country to take the America First agenda to the next level, and that will take a different generation to do it.
That does it. I repeat, that.
Of course, they're all pulling their punches because they're also trying to woo the MAGA base at the same time, and that's part of the problem here, but it's telling that they're actually daring to mention Trump. There are a few things that could have been the last highlight. DeSantis leading the charge against insane questions or the stupid Survivor stuff could have got a mention, but we've already talked about it. So my last highlight is going to be that the downsides of other candidates were actually raised and highlighted. Sure, they were raised in the worst way possible, but we're now actually getting a sense of the differences between them. We're getting an idea of who has actually done stuff versus who's really good at just talking about stuff. We got an idea of who actually has answers to questions versus who has answers to different questions. We got an idea of their reliance on identity politics, which flies in the face of our supposedly anti-identity politics position. We got another insight into the fact that Vivek Ramaswamy is running a campaign built on the assumption that you will never ever Google him, like the fact that he's anti-social media for young people but also kissed up Jake Paul on TikTok, or that he's anti-China after making a ton of money in China. But there's a problem here. Anytime we got near actually uncovering a key difference between candidates and allowing them to debate, the moderators let this happen.
The next question is for Governor DeSantis.
We get three things done. If we want to get things done, here's how we get it done in Washington. We must find a way.
Can we please respect the time?
So lots of lowlights, a few highlights, but overall, we lost, the Democratic Party won, and Donald Trump continues to consolidate support without having to even get in the mud. Here's the brutal truth. None of this even matters unless these candidates can explain why they deserve your support over Trump. They can make these little pot shots at him if they want, but Trump won't care, and he shouldn't care. The primaries are his to lose, and unless the rest of the field does something drastic, nothing's going to change that. And for the few of them who are actually running for president, instead of Trump's VP or cabinet member or cupbearer, that's the problem they need to solve, and that's the problem they're not solving.